We'll just wait for people to join for a few minutes and then we can get started. Hi guys, pop a message in the comments. Hi Rachel, hi Les, hi Abigail, hi Lucia. Hope you're all good on this very warm day. Very, very warm. Sorry if you can hear my fan in the background. Hi Holly. If you can't hear me very well, then please let me know. I'm hoping that with my headphones on, you can hear me okay. Hi Catherine, hi Liam. Perfect, just wait another minute or so. And then we will begin. Okay. Cool, so we're going to be doing a few lives like this, sort of quite regularly from now on. It's going to be weekly and they'll be on different things, and if there's anything in particular that you're wanting a live session on, then you can just let us know. So the ones that we've got in the pipeline at the moment are next week we're doing one on how the menstrual cycle impacts performance. So that's obviously really important for females and anyone with female hormones, but it's also really important for trainers who are training females as well. And the following week, we're doing one on the importance of building muscle when you're injured. A lot of people like to maybe sit at home and rest, and that's not always the best thing. So that's also a really important one as well. Thanks, David, Charlie, and Michael for joining as well, just in time. So when we're looking at injury prevention, there is so many different things that we can do, and there's lots of different strands to it. And it's not that we necessarily have to nail every single one, but the more we can do, the better, because then we're more likely to prevent injuries from happening. And if you've prevented something before it's become an issue, then that's much, much better than having the issue to start with that you then have to rehab from, because you don't have to have that time out of training, you're able to carry on as normal. So the first thing that I wanted to discuss is warm-ups. And a lot of people, when they're warming up, sort of in the gym, they might just do a couple of reps or sets of the exercise that they were planning on doing anyway. So if they were going to do squats, they might just do squats, but a bit lighter. And those that run sometimes will just go off on their run. They won't do anything beforehand. And the impact of this is that we're not actually getting any additional blood flow to the muscles before we're running or before we're lifting weights, whatever it is that we're doing. Without that additional blood flow to the muscles, it's almost like the muscles haven't had that warning that they're about to start exercising, and then you're going to continue to load them. By doing that, we're then putting ourselves at a larger risk of injury. Our warm-up should really include a mixture of what we'd call dynamic stretching. So dynamic stretching would be something like doing sort of a lunge with a twist and then doing the same on the other side, rather than just holding sort of like a hip flexor stretch, for example, for an extended period of time. Most of the time we want to do stretches where we're just moving a little bit more. We want to be mobilizing, so if we're doing our upper body, we might want to be doing some rotations through it. If we're running, we might want to be doing some leg swings, for example, just so that we're getting a little bit of mobility through those areas of problem as well. And doing this warm-up helps provide our bodies with, our muscles, with oxygen. As well, which is something that they need to exercise, unless we're going to be doing something that's super explosive like sprinting, which we do eventually do what we call anaerobically, which is without oxygen, but we still obviously need to warm up first. Our muscles need a really good supply of oxygen and blood flow to help keep them nice and strong and ready to train, and particularly with the forces will increase that we put through them throughout that sort of session that we're doing. The other thing is with warm-ups, they help increase the synovial fluid to our joints. So synovial fluid is basically the lubricant for our joint, and you wouldn't want, in your car, any of the parts of your car to be working without oil, because then the car might catch on fire, and that obviously wouldn't be very good. Your body probably won't catch on fire, but you may well injure your joints sort of at your ligaments or maybe your cartilage as well. And our cartilage is there for shock absorption and for joint protection. So we want to be able to increase the blood flow and the synovial fluid there to help with that as well. And it also helps with proprioceptive feedback, having a good warm-up, which is maybe something that you haven't thought too much of. So proprioception is knowledge of where that joint is or that area is in relation to space and in relation to the other joints around it. So proprioception is me, if I put my arm out here, my hand, I can shut my eyes and with my other hand, I can match it, hopefully. Yeah, so within about that much, I've managed to match it even with my eyes shut. My body, I can't see that my left hand's somewhere and my right hand can match it with my eyes closed. And the reason that's important for injury prevention is, for example, take netball. That's a sport that I know really well and I absolutely love. Sometimes you might land on someone's foot and you want your ankle to be able to sense your foot. I've just landed on something. I need to keep myself nice and strong and not just roll over and get injured. And so we want to be able to sort of harness that before we have even started training. And something that I did with my netball team when I was at university, we had a lot of ankle injuries I think it was my 6th year at university. We had a lot of ankle injuries in the netball team that year. I think it was about 18 injuries in our team alone, which is huge. So I decided to, after a bit of research, put into place a warm-up just for our ankles that was focused on proprioception for the following year, and to see how much we could kind of reduce that injury rate. And the exercises I picked were ones that I knew would be helpful just based on sort of my prior knowledge, but also exercises that we were able to do without any equipment really, because we had to travel around a lot. And I was like, right, what can we do just kind of standing here, maybe using a band, but we can't take a wobble board with us or anything like that. And we reduced the injuries to 2 ankle injuries that season, which I'm hoping is as a result of the warm-up. And that was a huge win compared to what we had before, because we didn't have players out. We pretty much had our whole team throughout the whole season that was there. So that's maybe something that you don't think about when you think of warming up. And the other thing with warm-ups as well is it's mental preparation. You're getting ready, you're getting focused to lift whatever it is, the weight that you're trying to lift in the gym, to get ready for your sport. And that's also really important too. If your mindset's right, then that's going to help as well. I'm now looking at our sort of next part of injury prevention. If you'd seen the little pie that I put up the other day on Instagram and Facebook, the next thing we're going to talk about is progressive overload. So what this means is we are gradually increasing everything that we are doing over time, instead of just saying, oh, you know what, I've not run for 5 years, but I'm going to go do a 5k because someone tagged me on Instagram and said I had to do a 5k. And do you know how that ends? It ends badly. For most people, that ends badly. So we want to be gradually building things up over time and layering it on top, rather than just thinking, okay, I'm going to go out and just do this. And this is something that I've sort of seen, and I'm sure my other staff members have too, a lot from lockdown, where people have gone back to the gym or their sports and they've thought, oh yeah, I'll be fine. And they've suddenly just rushed back into everything, and that's when they've got an injury, because we want to build everything up. So a rough rule of thumb is sort of increasing our running distance, for example, by 10% each week. So if you've not run in years and years, you might just want to start off with a 1k to start with. If that's all good, you've tolerated that, you've got no pain and that kind of thing, no issues, then maybe 2 to 3 days later you do a 2k, and you can increase it like that. But the following week, if you've say done 10k in total that first week, you'll want to do about 11k the following week. So you've only increased it by 10%. And the reason for that is, if we're not adequately increasing our load slowly, that is the kind of thing that often leads to tendon injuries if we're not being slow with it. And that's because they get sort of micro traumas over time that eventually leads to that pain and that injury. I'm not sure if you saw the Conor McGregor fight the other day where he had that really nasty leg break. So for me as a physio looking at that, the mechanism of injury he had where he'd stepped back and his leg went, like, that's not normal. Our leg shouldn't be breaking from something like that. That tells me that he's probably already had a stress fracture there before. I know he's been doing a lot of running recently. Maybe it was that, maybe he hadn't increased it slowly enough. So that's the kind of really traumatic things that can happen as a result of not increasing things gently. So that's quite important too. So the next part of our pie is, I sort of mentioned strength and conditioning. And what I mean by this is if you are doing a couple of different things, for example, you really like going to the gym and you also play a sport, or maybe you run and you want to be able to get a little bit faster at running or decrease your times and that kind of thing, then we want to be able to do extra exercises that contribute to that sport that we're doing. So taking the example of netball, for me, for example, I, in the gym, put my focus on increasing my velocity so that I can then have a better jump height, because in netball I'm not particularly tall, I'm 5'8", I'm up against players that are 6 foot, 6'2". I want to be able to match what I'm doing in the gym to my sport, because then I'm less likely to get injured because I'm used to these movement patterns. And the other things I would sort of do in the gym for any sport that really involves any jumping would be jumping activities. So you might do single leg hops, you might do box jumps, you might do drop jumps off a box and things like that. And the reason for matching what you're doing in the gym to your sport is that we're then just getting this overall bigger picture of, okay, I'm doing X, Y, and Z in the gym, and that has carryover to what I'm doing in my sport, and therefore you're strong for your sport and you're less likely to get injured. Rather than what a lot of people do is, I play football on the weekends and I go to the gym and I just want really big arms, and they just train their arms. That's not going to help them in football, and then they end up with a hamstring injury, end up with an adductor injury, because they've not matched everything else that they're doing. The other thing to think about as well and consider with matching what you're doing in the gym to your sport, not necessarily gym, you might just be doing a few home exercises as well, is the level of fatigue that you're putting yourself under. So if you're training in the gym for aesthetics and you're really wanting to look really good on the beach and that kind of thing, you're doing a lot of volume, you really want to have those muscles pumped and looking good, but then you're going out and you're playing football 3-4 times a week as well, and you're maybe not thinking about the mixture of the two and how that combines to fatigue your body and your central nervous system as well. So it's that combination that can then potentially lead on to an injury if we're doing too much of lots of different things. For example, I had someone here earlier with a quadriceps injury, and he said to me he'd done it playing football golf. Sounds quite fun. He was just kicking the ball in his quad tour. But leading up to that, he was like, I did a really, really hard session in the gym. I haven't been sleeping well. I'd been running. I'd been doing rugby stuff. And this is all in the space of literally a couple of days that built up to then having that one injury. And he had an injury that wasn't contact related. It was completely avoidable. It was just him kicking this ball, and that's what happened. So that's why it's important to match things up where you can as well. And then when we're looking at another piece of this injury prevention pie, we want to look at recovery, which kind of leads on quite nicely from what I was just talking about there. And there's a few different ways that we can sort of help ourselves to recover. And one of those things is adequate rest days. So many people are guilty of overtraining. They think, I've got to go to the gym 7 days a week, I've got to go 6 days a week, and then on that day off, they're not really having a day off, it's the day that they're playing their sport, or I'll just go for a quick run. Not having adequate rest will fatigue your central nervous system. It doesn't allow enough time for your muscles to recover, and that's when you end up with an injury. So a bit like that person I just described to you, where they had a build-up of all of these different things, and then bang, their quadriceps have torn. So that's something you really want to look at with your training, is, am I giving myself enough rest? And sometimes it's thinking too, like, for example, you might play a match on a Saturday, netball, rugby, football, and maybe normally you go to the gym on a Sunday, but sometimes some matches take it out of us more, or if you've had a big race, that race might take it out of you a little bit more, and you feel it. You wake up and you're like, I still feel a bit tired, I still don't feel ready. And it's on those days where you feel like that maybe you should consider either not training that day or really backing off what you're planning on doing. And if you did want to back off what you were doing, one of the things that we can do is a deload week as well. And this is something I have posted about before on my Instagram and Facebook. So a deload week would be where you reduce the load that you're currently doing. So if you normally go to football 5 times a week, and you do sort of hour and a half, 2 hour sessions, then you could still go 5 times, but you could reduce it to half that, and maybe you just go and do the warm up and you do your sort of units training. You might just be with the forwards or whoever, and then you pull yourself out of training because you think, no, actually I'm really fatigued. And this is something I do feel lots of sports clubs should be putting in place as well, is cycling their training a little bit more, where they think, actually, we pushed everyone really hard for 4 or 5 weeks, and we've had some really hard games. Maybe this week we need to drop it down a little bit for them. But the way you can manage it yourself would be, if you are going to the gym, or you are someone that really likes running, for example, the following week, so the week that you're feeling quite fatigued, then the following week you can do half the amount you were doing before. So if, for example, I was squatting 60 kilos for 6 repetitions and I was doing 3 sets of that, then I would go and at about 50 to 60%, and so maybe I'll be lifting 30, 40 kilos instead, and I can do that for the same sets and reps. Or I can also reduce the amount of sets and reps that I'm doing of exercises. And you can really dig deep into stuff that you can do for deload weeks, because you don't necessarily have to manage it like that. Sometimes what I'll do for mine is all of my compound movements, so that's like my big heavier movements, I will reduce them to about 60% of my 1 repetition max. So say I could lift 100 kilos as for 1 rep, I'd reduce it to 60%. But my other smaller exercises that I'm doing in that session, I will keep the same instead of reducing them if I feel like I'm able to. So that's really something where you have to listen to your bodies. And if you are a personal trainer, or you're a physio or a sports therapist watching this, because I know there's a few of you on here, it's something that you need to be really mindful of with your clients as well, and with your patients, that actually, how much have they been doing? Are they telling me that they're fatigued? Are they telling me that they're tired? Maybe it's time to just back off a little bit this week to be able to help them with that. So that was something I would definitely suggest. And that sort of again leads into my next point of monitoring your load. So just checking in, how much have I been doing? And particularly with things like running, where it's really easy to just keep building up, because each week you feel fitter and you feel faster and you're able to do more. But actually looking back at it and thinking, oh, I've done quite a lot this week. And the great thing about our GPS trackers and our phones and our Stravas and all of that now is we can sort of track that just a little bit better than we could before. We can look at it and think, oh yeah, this week, between my rugby training session and my 2 runs, I've covered 15, 20 kilometres, and normally I'd only do 10. And that's when you think, okay, next week I'm going to reduce it down because I don't want to get injured. And David's asked, is a deload week another way of saying you're keeping yourself ticking over? Yes, exactly. You're still exercising, but you're kind of going through the motions, and it almost feel like you've sort of done a warm-up at the gym and then you're cooling down and going home. And it might feel a little bit pointless at the time, but actually the next week you're probably going to really thank yourself for it, and you're going to feel much better, and you're going to be able to do quite a bit more as well. And with regards to sort of managing load, having worked in professional sporting environments, one of the things we will look at, sometimes if we've been a bit late and they've already been injured, something we'll look at is, right, let's have a look at all of their data for the last 2-3 weeks leading up to this, because working in rugby, they all have GPS trackers that they put in almost like little sports bras, and it goes in their back here. And we will look at it and think, okay, so this person's coming with a calf injury. What did they do last week? Okay, they hit their top speed 15 times in a game. Well, that's quite a lot compared to normal. Oh, and in that game, they also covered 2-3 kilometres more than normal. And then we look at their training and we think, oh, actually, they had an extra session that week too. And you can see how it all just builds up to then lead to that sort of catastrophic moment where they end up being injured. But the other thing we are trying to get a bit better at, particularly in professional sports, is monitoring it in time to stop that injury rather than looking at it afterwards. And that's where our sports analysts and our S&C come in as well, who can look at the data and think, yeah, these players have done way more than we'd expect this week, so they're not going to train on Friday, for example. But that's something that I think we're generally getting a little bit better at, but that needs to filter down to our sort of amateur athletes as well. So next part of our pie is sleep. Human growth hormone is released in our sleep. We have a lot more human growth hormone when we are younger. That's why babies sleep for so long, and that's why they grow so quickly. As we get older, it kind of slows down a little bit, but we still have it being released. But if we're not going to sleep and we're not sleeping well, then we're not going to get that release of human growth hormone. Human growth hormone will help your muscles grow, it'll help your joints recover and that kind of thing. So if we're not getting that, you can see how then that can lead to injury. The other thing that sort of sleep helps us with as well is actually accidental injury. So there was a study of American college footballers, and actually what they found was accidental injuries were increased by people not having sleep. And that's not necessarily sports related injuries, that's like you falling over at home, you falling down some steps, those kind of things. They are increased as a result of not getting enough sleep. And that same thing can be applied to sports as well. If you're not getting enough sleep and you're not necessarily thinking about what you're doing, then that in turn can also lead to an injury. And they also think that might be due to daytime kind of sleepiness, where you're not getting enough meaningful kind of recovery when you're sleeping. I was listening to a really interesting podcast the other day that was talking about how sleep shouldn't be called sleep, it should be called rest, because we can get sleep, but it can actually be really poor quality, and what we actually need is good rest. And I thought that was just quite an interesting kind of takeaway from that as well. And we should be aiming for 8 hours of sleep a night, regardless of our age. When we're a bit younger and in our teens and that kind of thing, we should be looking for more than that, but everyone on here is older than that. But we really do need to be focusing on our sleep. If we're not getting 4 hours of consistent sleep a night, that means uninterrupted sleep. You haven't got up and gone for a wee, you haven't checked your phone, that kind of thing, in that time, then we're also more likely to experience pain differently as well. So it's often going to be worse. So that's something else to kind of consider. And obviously we want more than just those 4 hours, but we'll probably kind of come in and out of sleep before and after them. So that's something to look at too. So going on to our last piece of the pie is nutrition. So not having enough proteins and carbohydrates post-workout means that our body is unable to repair. So when we exercise, we have what we call exercise-induced muscle damage. This is where we get sort of little micro damage to our fibres in our muscles. And the way that they are repaired is by having protein in there. So if we're not getting enough protein, then they're not going to be able to repair. We also need, with our protein, a little bit of carbohydrates. It's almost like carbohydrates open the gate for protein to go into the muscle, so that then it can be nice and repaired and recovered. So that's why it's so important. You hear lots of gym bunnies saying, oh, you need to have protein within 2 hours of going to the gym. And that's not necessarily the case. If you've not eaten that day, then the sooner you can get protein in after your gym, running, sports activity, then the better. But if you have eaten protein already that day, maybe you're training for football in the evening, for example, you have a little bit more time before getting that in. But if you're not getting those nutrients in, then you're not able to actually recover fully. And this can also cause like longer recovery times, and it's going to increase your risk of injury if you're still doing the same amount of load, but you're not getting that recovery in. So that's something to sort of bear in mind as well. And similar to that is the importance of drinking water. So many people are dehydrated, and if you're not having enough hydration, your muscles are impacted. As soon as you're contracting your muscle, think of a sponge. If I squeeze a sponge, all of the water comes out the sponge. As soon as I let it go, the water can then go back into the sponge if it's left in your bath. And it's the same thing with your muscles. So as soon as you let go of that contraction, it's absorbing everything that's nearby. If there is nothing to absorb, so not nothing, but less to absorb, sort of fluid-wise, nutrition-wise, collagen, that kind of thing, within the area, then your muscle's not able to absorb it, and it's therefore not able to function properly. And that will cause an injury. I think it's 2% of sort of dehydration, which doesn't sound like a lot. That's just you going to the toilet and thinking, oh, my wee's a little bit more yellow than I'd want it to be. That is enough to cause muscle damage and injuries. So particularly in this hot weather, drinking water is even more important than before. And looking at people's diets as well. So sort of the vegan diet, which I know a lot of people are very much into their natural sources of food and not wanting to have any meat and that kind of thing. Completely understand it from an ethical standpoint, but actually there is more and more evidence coming out now that particularly higher level athletes are having more tendon-based injuries that are staying with them for longer. So where previously they might have had what we'd call a bit of a reactive tendon, where it's a little bit sore, it's a bit achy, it settles down after a bit of a deload and then they feel fine. Now we are seeing more severe tendon injuries that are lasting for longer and debilitating the athlete more. And the idea at the moment is, because if they are on a vegan diet, they don't have enough collagen. So if they're not getting enough collagen, that helps the extracellular matrix in our muscles repair. Basically just helps repair in our muscles. And you don't get collagen from synthesized sources at the moment. It's only from things like meats and like the bones, tendons, ligaments, cartilage, that kind of thing. So years ago, people would have their roast dinner and they would boil up the bones and have it as a broth the next day. That is actually a really, really good source of collagen. Now we tend to just buy tablets from MyProtein, which is equally as good. But if you're on a vegan diet, then the chances are you're not getting that protein and therefore you're more likely to get injured. So that completes sort of all the pieces of my pie. There is loads more that I could talk about with injury prevention too, with sort of stress and anxiety all feeding into it as well. But we'll sort of leave it there for today. But if anyone has any questions, we've got sort of 5 minutes like a Q&A, and it can be questions about what we spoke about today or anything else related to injuries. Just pop them in the chat and I will answer them for you. But thank you very much for joining. There we go. Just swiping down to see if there's any questions. Oh, thanks, James. Fab. Cool, I don't think we've got any questions today, but if anyone thinks of any, then you can message on the group. You can have it as an open message to anyone and we'll answer it, because the chances are if you're thinking it after watching this, then other people will be thinking the same thing too. And if not, if you're a little bit nervous and you want to privately message us instead, then you feel free, go ahead. We can always post the question anonymously on the group as well, because other people, again, might be thinking it. But yeah, you're very welcome, Greg. I'm glad you enjoyed. Have a lovely evening. Bye, guys.